Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Crime and Entertainment. Now, I have here a very special guest. This man infiltrated the DeCavalcante Crime Family out of New Jersey. Now, that family has been known to be the basis of the series that you guys know I love if you follow this show, The Sopranos. So we're going to get into his story, but please welcome to the show today, Mr. Giovanni Rocco. Giovanni, how you doing, my friend?
Good, Wade. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Hey, man, I'm doing good. Not bad for a Sunday. We're recording on a Sunday. I'm not sure when this episode will drop, but, just been taking it easy today, relaxing, getting some sun. It's a little hot where I'm at. I don't know what about the weather is where you're at, but it's a little hot here.
Yeah, I could use some heat.
Yeah. I'm getting a little too much of it now. If it's this hot in April, I don't know what the hell it's going to be like in July and August, man. I'll tell you.
Right.
All right. So, I mean, this is your first time on the show. So when we have a first time guest, we like to kind of kickstart things from the beginning. Tell us a little bit about, where you grew up, what the landscape was like, as a youngster, and then we'll go from there.
Well, I'm third generation cop, fourth generation first responder. I was the black sheep of my family. I didn't think I'd ever wind up on the side of the law. Growing up, but I grew up in a town called Bayonne, New Jersey. I write about it in the book. It's very Brooklyn-esque. You hate to always use movie analogies, but it is a bit of the Sopranos mixed with some old school. Back in the day, it was very Godfather-like, right? The neighborhoods where, you relied on each other, you survived amongst each other, whether you were blue collar, white collar, longshoreman, you could be a fire, like we talked about earlier, you could be a fireman, you could be a cop, or you could be a gangster. It was going to be one of these, but we all survived around each other. It took a village. So,
yeah, that's a lot of guys that I talked to, man, this, grew up in those areas and grew up in that life. They said that it was, really either one of three things. You're either going to be a cop, a firefighter, or you were going to get involved in the life. It just all depended on, which route you chose. And those are three options for sure. But I mean, definitely when you're going into the life, you got to look at, there's not too many great outcomes. I mean, as it's been stated, there's really only about two places you're going to wind up. It's in jail or dead.
Right.
And obviously, you experienced that firsthand. What kind of sent you, because you said you weren't really thinking you were going to become a cop, what kind of set you on that path to go into law enforcement?
Well, I always looked up to my father. My father wrote, he wrote us and he raised us hard, my brother, myself, and, even my sister. He raised us to be tough and he raised us to fear no man. So, I had that, and, just the exposure that I had to him growing up and watching him make collars or guys in the neighborhood make collars, you couldn't get away from it. It was all around you, as was the mob and as was everything else that was going on, any racket going on in the neighborhood. You saw everything. But, I watched my father make a lot of collars, whether he was working in patrol or he was a detective. And, I heard about the cases because he would bring crime scene photos home. I think looking back, he probably a lot of autopsy photos, or if somebody, homicide scenes, he would show us at a young age because he didn't want us to go down the road. I'm assuming that's why he did it, to deter us from that life and show us how, treacherous it could be. So I knew all the details going in as a kid. If a mob hit happened in our neighborhood or in Hudson County someplace, even in New York, I heard about it all the time, because my father worked major case. And it just being exposed to the life and watching it. I didn't do well in school, self-admittedly. I had a lot of attention problems. And, early on in school, I was a disciplined kid. I had to be suspended and detentions and summer schools. And looking back, it's probably because I had some ADD in me or ADHD, which lent to be a good tool to have later in life to focus in my undercover career for hypervigilance. So that was good. So, I kind of gravitated towards the dark side where, my relationship with my father wasn't that well because of my grades in school and me keeping everything from him, always getting suspended. So I gravitated towards my friends who were doing wrong, or my family who was doing wrong, or I always wanted to be involved in something that was against whatever my father was doing. I wanted to go against the grain.
You wanted to go opposite.
Yeah, it's being a dumb kid, So, and it all led to later on. I bribed my way out of high school. Not my proudest moment. I talk about it in the book. It's Jersey, though. You could bribe your way out of high school, I guess. And I did that. And I graduated and I got a job in a phone company, and I was blessed to have that. And then one day my father came to me and said they were giving a test for the cops. And I took the test and I did well on it, and I made it into the academy.
All right. So when you were coming, you said where you were kind of rubbing shoulders with some people that maybe were living the opposite life of what your father was trying to keep you from. Did you ever get deeply involved with anybody that was in the life at that time? I mean, I know growing up, you know who the guys are that are involved in organized crime. Did you ever have any run-ins with them? Do you ever know them? Because that's always been one thing that's kind of fascinated me about people that maybe grow up in a certain area. Then when you become an undercover, do they not recognize you? Is it just, that they not remember you from coming up? Because it seems to me it would be a lot easier for somebody coming from out of the neighborhood to be able to fit right in there. But maybe I'm wrong because I have no background in law enforcement. So you kind of give me a insight into that, because I don't know if you've seen them around the neighborhood, they might remember you.
Sure. Yeah. So I ducked out of the neighborhood I grew up in. I didn't do a lot of undercover work early in my career. I did a lot of other investigations if it brought me into my old neighborhoods, or, Hudson County is a big area. So
Right.
I used to do a lot of undercover outside of that area. Wherever I was, born and raised, I tried to stay out of there for the most part. But
Okay.
sometimes you can't help it, right?
Right.
And again, I write about it in the book where once I was in the DeCavs, a guy brought me back to my old neighborhood where I grew up. I thought, oh boy, here we go. That was a sweaty moment for me. But yeah, you kind of just, and with me, it was different because once I decided to be an undercover and they gave me the opportunity and I started doing some work for the DEA in different counties and different, agencies, I went the biker route. I grew the big beard. I had the long hair. So I changed my whole persona. So if you saw me, I really just look like, I look like an outlaw biker or a meth head, either one of those. So I was, kind of unrecognizable.
Right. Yeah. Well, you put that on somebody, man, that's going to disguise a look, 100%.
Sure.
Especially, you growing up in a Italian neighborhood or something like that. Yeah. You grow the long beard, you start doing the biker thing. That will kind of, camouflage your appearance there, so to speak, for sure.
Yeah, it can. Sure.
Now, did you work any big like undercover cases with the bikers right off the rip?
I did, right out of the gate. Thank God it didn't go too far. Back then, I'm talking early 90s, like 92, 93. My first case was a long term, and long term back then meant maybe 3 to 6 months. You didn't do really long term cases if you were a local or a county cop. Back then it was different. Your boundaries, you had to stay in your own backyard kind of thing, unless you're on a task force. And then as my career went on, the task forces grew and FBI and DEA accepted guys onto task forces and they started opening up to that. That gave me more opportunity to go out and do what I had to do. So, yeah.
What group was you infiltrating there, if you're allowed to say?
I wouldn't say for safety purposes.
Okay.
Because
that's fine. Yeah.
My family had some connections to them too. So I don't,
Okay.
And that's the thing, right? I identified my intentions, kind of like this Italian case. My intentions were not to infiltrate this major outlaw group, but the guys that I was dealing with, they were highly connected to them and high level associates.
Yeah, no, that's understandable. I don't want you to give out any information that could, be detrimental to, you or your family or anything else. But as a, the interviewer, I got to ask.
Because I could tell you it's one of the big three, right?
Right.
Yeah. One of the big three.
And most everybody knows who those three are that listen to our show. We've had guys on here that's dealt with the Outlaws. We've had guys on here that's dealt with the Hells Angels. And there's another big one that's big around that area that I'm sure people can put two and two together and probably figure it out who it was. So how did this particular investigation come about to where you're going to go up undercover in the DeCavalcante family? And then once we end on that, we'll kind of explain who the DeCavalcante family was to any of our listeners that don't know. So how did that particular investigation come to land on your doorstep?
Yeah, I just fell into it, right? A lot of times in my undercover career, I had my own cases going, and I'm not the only undercover that does this, but you're brought in as a cameo, right? So you're from the South. You might have a certain dialect or a certain way you do business, but you might be let's say you're dealing with a biker gang, you're dealing with another criminal organization, and you're feeling threatened. You might want to bring in somebody like me from New York that has a strong background. And we don't tell you we're organized crime, but we just give everybody around you the impression that we are. And that kind of gives you a level of protection, or it helps. Oh yeah, I get it. Now I see what guy Wade is doing. He's connected to this guy Giovanni. This guy Giovanni must be connected to New York. So it's a whole organized thing. So by bringing somebody in and doing cameos, we did that all the time. Me, I was brought in, and I talk about it all the time. I was brought in for my stink. The stink that I had on me the minute I walked in a room, whether I wore a button-down shirt. And I didn't look like a biker at this point in my career. I was clean cut as I am now and dressed as I am now. So I would come in and just be the bona fides for you. And that's what happened one night. The guy was doing a drug deal in Atlantic City, and he asked me to come down, have dinner with him. He had some guys, some knock around guys coming down, and they were going to drop off some product to him. And it was a significant amount. And he just figured, you know what, I just have you there as you know, a little bit of bona fides. So that happened. And the way I came off, they bought into it, and they created a whole persona, a whole backstory or legend, if you would have it. And they went back to the neighborhood and said, yeah, we did business with these guys from another family, like a whole nother crime. They made up some crazy story. So once that happened, you know, we didn't care at that point, because let them believe what they want. This is going to be a quick hit. This is going to be a couple of keys or something like that. We'll get them over that threshold, and then we'll put these guys to sleep, you know, put them into prison. So, you know, of course, what happens is this kind of dovetailed into this whole connection, and they thought I was somebody important or somebody connected to another family, and it just took a life of its own. And those guys happened to show up at that night. They were low-hanging fruit and associates of the DeCavalcante Crime Family.
Wow. Now, you know, you're talking Atlantic City, a lot of it that time, and I'm not sure the particular dates, and I could be wrong, but Atlantic City was more or less controlled by the Philly mob. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, would that be the Nicky Scarfo era in that time?
It wasn't the era, but it was the Nicky Scarfo guys that they actually went back to the neighborhood and said they were doing business with Bruno Scarfo guys.
Okay.
So they made this whole legend up. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So Nicky was a brutal guy. And we actually just did an episode with Scott Bernstein, who's a mob historian. And it was funny. There was a guy by the name of Sal Testa, who was Chicken Man Testa's son. They put a bomb up under his porch. He took power right after Bruno got killed. And I don't think it was very long either. And he got a bomb up under his porch and he was killed. Well, Sal Testa was kind of like, you know, basically if you wanted to groom a gangster to come up in the ranks, he was that guy.
Right.
And he was eventually taken out, you know, on the orders of Nicky. But before he was taken out, he was left a piece of property that he sold to an up and coming real estate developer at that time for about 3 times the amount of what he was, you know, originally bought for. That guy, as a lot of people might know, would go on to be the president of the United States, Donald Trump. So even back then, if you wanted to do anything, if you wanted to have anything built, if you wanted to open up a business, you had to, in some way, shape, or form, rub shoulders with the mob in some kind of way, even back then. Were you aware going in? Obviously, I'm sure you were of the stronghold that they had on Atlantic City and areas around there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you know, early on in my career, I was doing Italian organized crime, traditional organized crime early in my career. Since my 20s, I was investigating it. So I knew the old Nicky Scarfo crew, and I did, you know, investigations into them. And then it graduated into Nicky Jr. And I actually worked cases and, you know, prosecuted the cases for him. You know, I didn't prosecute them, but I investigated and worked on the cases that put him in jail, and some other guys. So I had a really good understanding on how the system worked. And again, growing up in my neighborhood, to your point, any construction job, you have to have labor, you have to have product, you have to have goods coming in, windows, TVs, cement, concrete, whatever it is. The unions or the mafia controlled all of that, right?
Yeah.
The mob controlled. So you couldn't, if you were a Donald Trump or a developer, you couldn't put a building up. You personally, the investor, might not know what's going on behind doors, but they're going to figure it out. They're going to have their no-show jobs. They're going to work it out amongst the families. And that's how they did business. And they still do to this day.
Now, real quick, you know, you heard that term thrown around in The Sopranos, which we'll get to how The Sopranos kind of relates to your particular case, but explain to our audience that may not know what exactly a no-show job is.
No-show is just what it is, right? You know, I have a job. I might be a shop steward, or I might be a guy connected to a union. You might be somebody of importance. And, you know, each job has so many jobs that have maybe a supervisor or a shop steward or somebody that comes in just to check. So a no-show is somebody that, I'll give you a bridge job, for instance. Take a repair or a painting of a major structure of a bridge, you know, bridge crossing in New York and New Jersey. That's a long-term project. That could actually go for a couple of years. So I might get 2 or 3 no-shows out of that. So a no-show is, I give a job to Wade. Wade's a connected guy with a certain family, and, you know, we divvy it up, and you have a no-show. And your job basically is to come, drink a cup of coffee, show your face in case anybody in your union hall challenges it or says that you didn't show up for work. And you come, you hang out for a little bit, you hold your meetings there, and then you go on your way and you have the rest of the day to yourself. I think you maybe work 30, 40 minutes out of the day. You might grab a broom and help somebody out and make it look good. So, or there's just times when you don't even show up. You just have somebody sign you in if you have to sign in or whatever it is. It's literally a no-show job, and you have all it goes towards your union books back then. It can go towards your pension or whatever you're working towards. So yeah, your hours.
Okay. So you're infiltrating here the DeCavalcante crime family. Now, for those that don't know, that is supposedly the basis of the TV show Sopranos. That family, which obviously, if you paid attention during that show, it was a New Jersey crime family, a bit smaller, but it is actually, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it one of the longest standing families, like, of all time, like from Italy? It's one of the longest tenured families, even though it might not be quite as on the same scale as the Gambinos and some other ones from New York. It's been around for quite a while.
Right. And it goes back to the old, to the motherland. That's how far back it goes, to Sicily, or, wherever it was based out of before it came to America and became the American crime family that it is. Yeah, it is the longest standing Italian American crime family in the history of the country. It's not one of the more popular. It's not the Gambino. It wasn't Lucky Luciano's or Scarface, Capone's outfit. It wasn't something like that, but they've been around for a long time. And they kind of paved the way for those other guys to come up. You're talking 20s, 30s. These guys have been around forever. And they're very tight knit. What you saw in The Sopranos, there could be arguments who The Sopranos is based on. My exposure to them, my exposure watching the show, you can see the similarities. There's a lot. The pork store, the neighborhood, the go-go bars, the backstories too have a lot to do with it. The Decavs had a lot of problems over the years, so they always fell under the New York families, whether it was the Decavs out of New York or whether it was the Gambino crime family that they eventually fell over, because they were known as the farmers. They farmed everything out. The other families, if they wanted murders done or they wanted heists or robberies done, they would farm it out to the Decavs and they would do it. So they became known as the farmers. So they're not one of the big five, but they've been around for a long time.
So did they answer primarily to the Gambinos around that time?
They did not. They answered to themselves. Their boss was John Riggi,
right?
Who was Sam the plumber. Sam DeCavalcante was the original boss. Who came here and started the DeCavalcantes here in the States. And then after that, there were a couple other bosses, but John Riggi was probably the strongest and most ruthless. He ruled with an iron fist, John the Eagle, as they called him. He had a lot of control, and he was a smart man. So because of his wits and his ways of operating the unions, and he was the head of a union, he was he controlled a lot of the concrete and materials going to different construction jobs. So the other five families had to come to him and work it out with him all the time. So
Okay. Now, around this time, that's around when Gotti went to jail, right? Or was he still in power, or did he go to jail around this time? Because it was pretty close to that time scenario.
Yeah, I mean, John Riggi went to prison on a racketeering murder charges, and he did some time. But around the same time, I mean, as a young investigator, I would see the two of them at different funerals. Gotti, John Gotti Sr. and Riggi would be at different places. And Riggi feared Gotti, because Gotti was a ruthless guy the way he took over the family. So you had to walk on eggshells around him.
Right.
But I think Gotti had, from what I understood in my investigations, Gotti had a respect for Riggi, and Riggi had a respect, and they figured out a way to get along. So that's when they really started relying on each other. And when I came into the family, it was explained to me by my captain how it exactly works. They sat me down and told me, this is how we report, or we fall under. We don't report to them, but we fall under their umbrella, the Gambinos.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about that. Like you said, you made your introduction, or you were, part of a drug deal. Was that a drug deal originally when you got introduced?
Yeah, it was a drug deal, and it wound up being one of the made guys. His nephew was the guy we were doing business with. He was a tough kid in the street. He had a reputation, but he didn't have a good reputation in the crime family, like, around the Decavs. He was a neighborhood kid, born and raised. Everybody knew him in Elizabeth, New Jersey. So if you think about like that area where the pork store is, that's the hub, right? If you think of an episode in The Sopranos, that's the life these guys lived every day. They went to these different spots, hung out every day, had the coffee shops and, the butcher shops and the delis and they had everything there. So it was self-sufficient, kind of like Bayonne was. Elizabeth was the same on a smaller scale. So Jimmy Smalls was the guy that we did the drug deal with. His uncle wound up being Charlie Stango. And what happened was when I wasn't making good money with Jimmy, we kind of got pawned off. And then Luigi Oliveri, this guy came in and he was another low hanging fruit. He was just an associate within the family when I met him. And he kind of saw me and Jimmy making money in the street. So he came sniffing around, and that's how the street works, right?
Right.
So Jimmy kind of reported at the time to Luigi, and Luigi said, I want to meet this guy. And we arranged for a meeting. He met me. And then that was going well for a long time. And then, of course, Jimmy got jealous because I'm making money with Louis now. So Jimmy tried to trump him, one up him, and said, listen, you should meet my uncle. My uncle's, soon to be captain, and he's going to get made in the family. He's going to be a boss. So, he recommended it. It never came to fruition for a few months, but then eventually the opportunity came, and we were introduced to Charlie Stango, who at that time was a captain of the family. And when I met him, it was fine. It was just a small introduction. He was on parole for murder. He had just gotten out, just got released. So he moved to Nevada because he was still on paper, as we call it, on parole. So he moved to Nevada, and next thing you know, he started calling me, and we built a relationship, and it just created a life of its own.
Okay. Now, when you were undercover, you were going by what, Giovanni Gatto? Is that correct?
Yeah, Giovanni Gatto.
Okay. So how did you go about coming up with that name? Was it, to have a backstory kind of built into it? Because talking with some of our other past ATF agents that we've had on the show, the reach that the mob or some of these motorcycle gangs have, I don't think is quite understood by the general public of how deep they can go and check into somebody. I mean, we had a guy named Lou Velozzi on the show, and he was saying that they would even go so far as to pull his credit report. They had a guy that was a what do you call it? A realtor, and they would get their credit reports pulled and see exactly like what they owed, or had they had mispayments or what it was. And he said it was even kind of creating something. He had like a Saks Fifth Avenue account, and he's like, look, I'm supposed to be a biker, like I can't have a damn Saks Fifth Avenue account. So he said there's things that the most common things that you won't think about are things that they can sniff out and can blow your cover real quick. How did you go about building a backstory without giving away any trade secrets, obviously, to that particular name?
Oh, it's not an easy thing, Wade. I mean, at my height of my career, I had 4 different identities. So think about it: 4 different social security numbers, 4 different dates of birth, 4 different credit histories, 4 different everything, right?
That's a lot to remember.
Some of these guys were blue collar, some of them were white collar. If I was doing a political corruption job or, some kind of a, intelligence job, I had to be a more polished person. Other times I had to be more of a digging ditches, being a blue collar guy, whatever it was. So I had to have these. So yeah, a lot of work goes into it, but you train for it, right? Early in my career, to use your point, my first undercover license I ever got in Times Square when I was 22 years old. The government, the PDs, nobody gave me an undercover license. They told me, go to Times Square, buy some Fugazi license. I did. I bought it, and right in the middle of Times Square, like guys would go in and buy fake IDs and licenses, and I paid for what we now know as Al Qaeda was who I bought it from. These guys in there, Afghani guys, or whoever, Middle Eastern guys. I walked in, I looked through the thing, and I said, oh, give me this one here. This is a Florida driver's license. That's good. But to your point, that case, that outlaw biker case I did, those guys had hooks into the DMV. And one of the reasons why I didn't push the envelope and I pulled back was because they started looking into me. And back then we didn't have technology the way it is today, social media, but they had their hooks into DMV. They were a powerhouse. So you got to be prepared. Like you give me the example with the guy from Saks Fifth Avenue. Yeah, I could be an outlaw biker and a degenerate, but maybe that's not my account. As long as I could speak to it. Maybe if you call me out and go, hey, what's with the Saks Fifth Avenue? What's this? All of a sudden you got a ton of money? Nah, I dated a girl, whatever. As long as you come up with an excuse to talk it away.
Yeah, it's my wife's, or it's my broad's, or whatever the case may be.
Right.
So a lot of guys would incorporate, into their undercover story that they were married or maybe separated, or that they did have kids, so it could make it a little bit easier for them to maybe see them. Now, you didn't go that route, right? You weren't supposed to have kids according to your cover story. Is that correct?
No, you don't want to have, and as an undercover, you really don't want to say you have kids, or, sometimes you can, but it's something I chose not to do. I never introduced the fact that I had kids, again, because I didn't need those responsibilities to hold me down somewhere. I was more of a drifter if I needed to be. I was a convicted, in this particular case with the DeCavalcantes, I was a convicted felon. I had a history. I had a criminal history. But again, I better be able to speak to it, because once they pull my record and they make a note of what day I was arrested, you better be able to say what day you were arrested. You know, it's not like I just forgot. That's not an answer in the street. Everybody knows, you know, the time you got arrested. I could tell you the weather, the day I got arrested. So
what was going on, what was the headlines in the news, everything.
Yeah, exactly. You better know. You better be able to speak to it. With the girlfriends and relationships, yeah, I had them in cases when I needed them. But I felt in this case, I had a girlfriend full time. Nobody ever met her. Guys talked to him over the phone. When I was on the phone with her, there was nobody on the other end. But there was a conversation going on. Say, you know, tell her I said hello. Yeah, okay. Yeah, he says hello. You know, she says hello back. You know, I always, and again, thank God I was never challenged, you know, but if I had to, I could produce her. You know, she was ready and she was on the sidelines waiting to come in if I needed it. She was another agent, but I never had to.
Now, in these particular situations, how is it going down here? Are you wired up? Are you just more or less kind of taking notes? You know, how are you doing it back then? Because I know nowadays you can put cameras in about any damn thing and get away with it. You can, you know, plant cameras anywhere. You put them on a button, for crying out loud. But back in those days, it wasn't quite as easy to get away with it. You know, what did they have you doing?
Heck no. I recorded everything every day. Every day, you know, I recorded everything because it needed to be for evidentiary purposes. When I could, I did video, you know, as much as I could. But again, technology kind of puts a squash to that sometimes and throws up logistics. But I recorded most every conversation I ever had over this almost 3-year period in this particular case. It's a lot of tapes, a lot of hours, and a lot of looking back going, holy crap, you know. So listening back to them after the case was over, it was like, you know, then I started to realize what I had put myself through a lot of different times.
So you never got patted down or anything like that, or it was just
yeah, guys would pat you down, and nobody's ever putting their hands on me, right? You know, at this point in my career as a young kid, you know, not knowing how to deflect or how to, you know, how to de-escalate a situation. But a guy could simply come by you, and you knew when they were checking. You walk by you, you know, let me squeeze past you, let me get past you. And then the next thing you know, they're rubbing your chest, they're rubbing your back, they're, you know, giving you a smack on the ass. You know, it's all for checking, you know.
Yeah, it looks like they're just kind of giving you, oh, hey, well, how you doing? And they're really, when they're rubbing on your back and patting you, they're making sure, without letting you know they're doing it.
Right. And, you know, I've had plenty of situations over my 25, 26-year career of guys went right over the device. And again, to your point, when I started this, we wore transmitters. They were about the size of a half of a VHF tape, you know, like an old movie tape. And you took that thing and stuck into your pants, and there was a transmitter, and it wasn't, sometimes it might be reel to reel, and it was a big recorder in your pants with 2 wires. There was no hiding it. You know, the only place you could put it is in your shoe or it's strapped to your back or in your crotch. But after time, it would heat up. After 2 hours of wearing it, it started to blister your skin. Whoa. So it would literally burn you because of the batteries they used. And, you know, nowadays they still come over. I got caught. I write about in the book. One night I was pulled over on the side of the road getting ready to go operational. And I couldn't get these 2 wires to go together. And as I'm sitting there trying to get them, and I didn't bring my glasses because I was too vain to let everybody know I couldn't see. And so I'm sitting there and I'm trying to get these 2 wires. And my captain, one of the guys that actually was reporting to me at the time, his son, whipped my passenger door open and just screamed, "Give me all your money." You know, had his hat on backwards, and it was all a joke. He meant it as a joke. So when I had these 2 wires and he pulled the door, I took them and shoved them under my driver's seat in my Cadillac. And he was like, no, wait. Gee, it's me. Don't shoot. He thought I was reaching for a gun.
He thought you was going for a piece. Yeah.
But if he would have walked up a little slower, he would have seen a completely different picture. So I'm blessed. Somebody was looking out for me. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I've heard different stories from people that was working undercover. We actually had Bobby Luisi on the show. He was out of Boston. Mm-hmm. He actually wound up getting made in Philadelphia. And one of the reasons that he went down was he done a drug deal with a guy by the name of Ron Previty, who was working undercover. He was working for the government. And he said at one time, you know, he was there at a meeting and he kind of put his foot up on the table and, you know, was talking, and then not really noticing that the wires had, I guess, come loose from his leg and was hanging right out the end of his pants, like right there. And he was like, you know, all they'd had to do was just look at it and they would have seen it and he'd have been done. You know, he'd probably never been heard from again.
Right. But and I'm going to guess it was a white wire because there's never a dark color wire.
Yeah, it's never something that can blend in. It's always a white wire.
No. No.
Got to make it just that little bit harder for you to do it.
Yep.
One thing I want to ask, because it's everybody that I've talked to, when I've talked to Jay Dobbins, there was a guy for him. When I've talked to, Lou Velosi, there was a guy for him. When I listened to the book with, who's it, Billy Queen, who infiltrated the Mongols biker gang, there was a guy there. There was always one guy that just never really trusted them, that just kind of smelt that they were a cop from day one. And they just, no matter what they did, they just couldn't, put off that they were legit and they were 100% on the up and up. Did you ever have anybody that maybe kind of questioned you, or that just kind of, gave you that side eyes? I'm not sure about this type of guy while you were dealing, or do you think you were pretty foolproof in, what you had done?
No, I wasn't foolproof by any means. I mean, early on, it was the guy Luigi, the guy that I was supposed to whack out eventually, and at the end of the case that I was supposed to kill for the family. I went to his social club first, and that's when he kind of leaked it out that there was a law enforcement leak. The law that they knew, they've been talking to law enforcement. So he shared it with me, and I had shown up with some stuff to drop off to him in his social club. And, he says, you want some espresso? You want me to make you coffee? So as we're sitting making coffee, he's walking back and forth, and he's working up the nerve to call me out on it, or at least to say something to me. And he did. And he said, the bulls are trying to take a shot at us, meaning the cops. Mm-hmm. And he says, so it's kind of weird that you're new around here, and now we're getting word that, the bulls. He wasn't saying I was a cop, but he's kind of he didn't know what to say. So I kind of asked him, and I challenged him on it, and I didn't come to a head with him, but I kind of like, what are you getting at? Are you trying to say that I'm no good? Because if that's what you're trying to say, like, there's a problem here. Just don't do business with me. Go your way and I'll go mine. And of course no, I'm just saying, I just wanted to tell you, just be careful what you're doing, because they're looking at us. So it was never that I was a cop. It was always jealousy. It was always that I was making more money. That was my problem. It was always, if I made more money, another guy in another family came to my captain late in the case, and he was very jealous of my relationship with my captain and how I had infiltrated myself to the level of that my captain exposed me to the administration. They brought me into the bosses. Like, nobody goes to the bosses, I was only going there because my captain was bringing me. So another guy from another family kind of started questioning me about it, and, asking me. I dropped some stuff off at his club, and he kept asking me, so where are you from? How long you know Charlie? How this, how that? Mistakenly, I went back at the end of the day and mentioned it to my captain. And I said, yeah, this guy had a lot of questions. Like, this guy, Augie, he's asking me 1,001. What do you mean he's asking you questions? Well, I'm just saying, he's asking me this, asking me that, how long I know you, like, my relationship. Well, who the F is he to ask you that? What'd you say to him? So again, I gotta stand up, because if I look weak, this guy's he's not gonna want me in his crew anymore. So I said this, and this. He says, oh yeah, if he thinks you're no good, then he must think I'm no good. So he sent me back with a message. Go back to that Borgata and deliver a message. Tell him Charlie loves you. Charlie will do anything for you over the years, but go F your mother. So I was supposed to deliver that message. And if I didn't,
Yeah. And the way you just broke that down is a lot, kind of like, I'm sure a lot of our listeners have watched the movie, Donnie Brasco, and the part of that Al Pacino portrayed of, Lefty Ruggiero. He represented Donnie. He brought Donnie in. So basically whatever Donnie done was a reflection of him. That's kind of that, responsibility, that code of ethics, if you will. So like he said, if he thinks you're no good, then he must think I'm no good, because if him bringing you around is a reflection of his work, so to speak. Is that correct?
It's absolutely correct. Because a lot of organizations, it doesn't matter the criminal organization, somebody brings you in and somebody vouches for you, you're on the hook for that.
Yeah.
So if this guy goes wrong or breaks bad, or it's always going to come back to you, no matter what the organization is. I used to hate being introduced by informants. That was the worst for me, because, I'd rather go it alone and try to infiltrate my way in. But a lot of times we have to use informants, but you don't know. Informants are always trying to get themselves off a charge. Mm-hmm. You don't, as an undercover, you don't get time to sit there and come up and train these guys. And, they're just shooting by the hip. A lot of times they forget to tell you, they're going to introduce you to this guy, Wade, and they forgot to tell you that the guy owes you 10 grand, right?
Right.
And then he doesn't tell you, you don't find out until I meet this guy, Wade, and I shake your hand. And then everything goes sideways because you want your 10 grand. Now I got an informant who's going to break bad on me any second and say, you know what, I'm sorry, I'll get you 10 grand. And by the way, that guy's an undercover cop. You know, it's happened. It's happened. You know, you never want to be that guy or girl.
Right. Yeah, that's pressure that I can't even imagine, man. And I've seen that a lot, you know, in movies and different stories and different guys that I've interviewed. A lot of people would rather go at it alone than depend on someone else. You know, for instance, we talked about Jay Dobbins. He was undercover with a guy named Pops, and Pops was the life that they were living at the time was just getting to be too much for him. He was starting to become a user of drugs again, which he had kicked for a little while, and they needed to figure out a way to get rid of him and still keep their story intact. So they wrote it off that Pop got murdered by a rival gang. So he didn't want to depend on somebody that could break it any second. Like you said, if they got a case hanging over their head, or if they are a drug user or a drug dealer, you never know when they could flip and give you up. And obviously when that happens, that's no good. That's no good for anybody involved, especially you.
No. You're not dealing in stocks and bonds.
Exactly. It's not just you're fired, you know, get another job. This is you're gone.
Yeah. And in the underworld, it just means a matter of, listen, I might owe somebody a lot of money and I got to go make quick money, and I know you have it. So the next time I do a deal with you or whatever transaction we're doing together, I'm just going to rob you. You know, I'm just going to stick you up out of nowhere.
Because as much as the mob is, you know, a business on respect and stuff like that, in the grand scheme of things, there is no honor among thieves.
No,
that's just the way it is.
That's it.
Like you just broke it down. If somebody's in a pinch, if they had a bad week, you know, on the books or the horses or something, and they need an extra 5-10 grand, if they know Giovanni's got it, when they meet you up, there's nothing to stop them from whacking you out and taking that money and paying off their debt.
Yep. Yeah. And I kind of had for me, it was terrible because as an investigator, I worked informants. I controlled informants. I worked high level informants. I worked guys from the mob, and I did homicide investigations for the mob. So I knew. So I had all of this in my head, all these different cases I worked. Just before this one popped off, just before this case, I worked an organized crime case where the informant was making great tapes and then eventually killed the guy that ratted him out and then killed himself. But by the grace of God, I'm blessed that he didn't just one day decide to take me out as well. You know?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Did you ever happen to possibly, like, you know, your paths cross with someone that you had your life with the undercover role in it while you were not portraying that particular role, while you were yourself? Did you ever have kind of a cross section of that? I know that's, you know, one of the scenes portrayed in the movie Donnie Brasco, where they're going through the airport and somebody recognizes him in Joe Pistone, and he's really got to kind of think on his feet, and he just decks the guy, you know, in the middle of the hotel to try to, you know, swerve any kind of suspicion. Did you ever have anything like that happen while you were time undercover?
Yeah, I never had to create violence or anything to deter it, but yeah, I've had multiple times. When you're doing long-term undercovers and you're doing it in your own backyard, per se, if you're doing it, you know, if you're not doing an international case and you're on, it's always the case, right? You know, think about it. If you take your family to Disney and you're walking down Main Street, here's a guy you haven't seen in 30 years or a girl you haven't seen in 20 years, and all of a sudden you bump into him. That's just Murphy's Law. It's going to happen. But when you're doing long-term cases, there's bound to some cross-contamination. So yeah, my true life met my undercover life at a soccer game. I write about it in the book, where I was sitting there at one of my daughter's soccer games, and, you know, between games, we took a break, and here I am enjoying my family on a weekend. And here's a Gambino guy comes walking up on us, you know, from a distance. I saw him and I said, wow, that doesn't look like him. And as he got closer, I realized it was him. And I talk about it in the book and how I was able to. And I was blessed because my wife was also law enforcement, and she had done some undercover work as well early in her career. So we had an understanding of escape plans if this ever happened, because it's not just about an undercover. If you put somebody in jail for murder or, you know, whatever the violent crime was, and you sentence somebody or you put somebody in jail for 15, 20 years, they could hold a grudge against you if you're a cop.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you never know. You never know. So you got to always be careful. So we were always vigilant, sometimes hyper vigilant. Was, you know, we're that way more so now, but yeah. So we kind of navigated it and worked it out, and she kind of caught on real fast. As soon as she saw me kiss the guy 2 times, she knew right away. Right. Grab the kids and go and just break off. And, you know, we kind of mitigated it, got through it.
Yeah, it's got to be some tense situations for sure, to find yourself in doing this kind of work. So at what point, I know there's a point to where they're actually ask you to do a hit. Now, it was probably, was it a while before they ever asked you to do this? Because you were more or less an earner, correct? For them, you brought in money.
I was bringing in money. That's what grabbed everybody's attention, is because I was a guy with product in the street. So I became an earner for myself.
Right.
And everybody was coming to me. So my intentions was not to infiltrate the mafia. This case just kind of took a life of its own. So I was dealing with Jimmy Smalls in the beginning. All of a sudden he was showing up with boots and shoes and products and cigarettes and all this stuff and then he was selling me dope. I was trading dope for it. And so that grabbed the attention in the neighborhood. And next thing you know, they're like, hold on a minute. Where are you getting all these boots from? You getting Timberland boots? Where are you getting Timberland boots? I want to meet that guy. So what's he going to say? He's low hanging fruit. So when somebody like Louis comes and Louis says, and that's one more step up the ladder. Now, next thing you know, Louis making money. Louis got a big mouth telling everybody what he's doing. And next thing you know, here's somebody that's higher than Louis that says, I want to know this guy. I want to make money. Then eventually when I met Charlie, then that's when everything changed for me. Then it went from just being an earner and a hang around and an associate of theirs to being Charlie's kid. This was my kid. He speaks for me. And what you had said earlier, like anywhere I went, it was instructed of me. I had a breakdown. They actually told me when they introduced me to the administration, by no means did they make me or made me a made guy. They had a meeting one day and Louis tried to claim me because he wanted me in his crew. He was soon to be made. And then Charlie put a claim on me. So of course they had to have a sit down and they both had to pitch their case to the administration. So that's how Charlie won. That didn't leave a good taste in Louis's mouth. So from that point on to Louis, I was no good. And then eventually Charlie trusted me enough, took some, high roads and some pitfalls, and it was good stuff and bad, growing pains. But eventually he came to me and started having me run his crew. So I had guys reporting to me directly, one being his son.
Wow. So. And I mean, typically when you're bringing in cash for the mob, they don't necessarily have you out here doing hits and enforcing, stuff in the streets. That's kind of what your deal is. You bring in cash. They've got other guys for that. They've got guys specifically for the enforcers, the hitmans, the triggermans, things like that. So it's not really right off the bat that they're going to say, okay, well, to prove you're one of us, go out and whack this guy over here, this guy over here. They're looking at you kind of like in the movie Casino, where they said they looked at Ace Rothstein, or I think they Lefty was his real name. They looked at him as a cash register. That was their, way to make money. So they don't want to jam you up with a murder beef when they got 4 or 5 other guys that they can go send to make that hit. They want to keep you out operating, making money, bringing it in for the family. Is that about right?
It's right. But I was the guy that they trusted. I was the guy that the administration trusted. I asked, do you want me to use guys in my crew? Do you want me to use guys from our own family? And they were adamant. No. You do this. This is your thing. Because again, I proved myself, my intelligence. I proved myself over a long period of time. I mean, this is every day talking to this dude.
Right.
And, a lot of times he would yell at me. I purposely screwed up so he could yell at me, and he would educate me. There's all things I did as an undercover that there was days he called me up and screamed and ripped me one end to the other. What are you doing? What are you, stupid? Jesus Christ. You're going to start World War III. But I did it purposefully. I did it at a cost and a risk to myself. But then when it came time for these are all old school guys I was dealing with. I wasn't dealing with the young guys in the beginning, the young guys that reported to me, but my capo, the underboss, the boss of the family, they've been in it for generations.
Right.
These guys some of their fathers were at the Appalachian meetings. Right. If you know about the Appalachian meetings.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The meeting.
That's how far back these guys go. So their level of trust is like they have a very small circle of trust. I was paying other captains after we did a job, or if I did a job with another crew. Charlie had me going to the other capo's house and paying him his homage, So I had that level of trust with these old school gangsters. These new school guys, they didn't think like these old school guys. They kept it very close to the vest. They didn't want anybody to know that we were going to kill one of their own. In the beginning it was 2, and then they took that one body off and they made it just 1. But yeah, they didn't want the whole family to know what they were doing.
Okay. Now, did you ever get into a situation to where, what do you do if you're undercover and for sure somebody's going to get whacked, or for sure somebody's going to get taken out? Is it your duty to report that and let them know? Do you at some point have to pull your cover? Do you keep playing it and just relay that information? How does that work?
No, I mean, my case in specific was you can't create violence. You can't let violence happen. Sometimes, some undercovers are put in a position where, right that moment, somebody pulls out a gun. You're not just going to yell time out or cut.
Yeah,
It's not a movie. We're not filming a movie, so you can't yell cut. But in my instance, I was at dinner one night in Las Vegas, and my captain sat there and told me all of these problems we were having internally with the administration and everything from the top down. And then in speaking with him, he turned around and he says, yeah, they're gonna do this, and you're gonna do it. I proposed you to do it. Oh, do what? Oh, we're gonna kill this guy. You're gonna kill this. We're gonna take care of this. You're gonna do this. Why? You got a problem with that, Giovanni? No. What are you gonna say? So of course, right then and there, I knew, well, this case is gonna come to an end because we can't allow murder to take place, right? So I was fortunate that they gave the task to me because we were able to mitigate it and keep this guy alive, Louis, for as long as we could until the end of the case. But then again, you can't be greedy with your evidence because you have somebody's life in your hands. So for months after that, there was a few months that I was able to prolong it. And then what I talk about in the book is I brought my old life back. I brought my biker guys in, my outlaw bikers. They were going to help me do this deed. I kind of planted that seed, and I said, well, he's like, look, don't you have anybody you can use, help you out if you need a couple of trigger men? I said, no, not really. The only two guys I got are my best friends, from when I was Dutch being one and another guy. And he's like, who, the biker guys? That's who you got to use. So he came up with the whole thing. He came, he told us how to do it. And
so you laid that out there enough for him to almost maybe kind of think it was his own idea.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, that's a lot of the genius of this undercover stuff, man, is, one, the way you were breaking down the steps, you didn't try going to the head guy because that's just never going to work. You're not going to get close to the head guy. You got to get close enough to the underling to where he's making so much money off of you that that's spotted by someone above him. Then they want to, how you making all this money? Show me this guy. Then they come to you. And then eventually you do the right thing and you make enough money. You're going to work your way to the guy you want to get to, but it's not an overnight thing. And I've had dealings like that in the business world, to where there was this guy that I used to work for in a steel company. And you almost, if it was your idea, he didn't really want to go with it. But if you laid enough stuff out there for him to kind of pick up the pieces and put it to you as his idea, he would go for it.
Right.
And so I understand that exactly what you're saying. Would you put well, I know these bikers, they're not really affiliated with us. I trust, that's who you got to use right there. You let them think that's their idea, and they're all for it 100%. Whereas if you might've said, I'm going to let these bikers do it right off the rip, they might have, maybe we keep it in the family, but because it was their idea, they were behind it 100%.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's like that in everywhere. Even in law enforcement, it's like that. You get a case agent, you're doing cases for them. I did cases where the agent got agent of the year. He got all the accolades and all the awards for the work that the undercovers did. And then he's sitting there with his chest puffed out and he's thinking, well, now I get to go bring my family to meet the director. I get a day in the Hoover building, and I get to go to lunch with the director, and they get all these awards and cash awards. The undercovers don't get that shit.
Yeah.
So here you are like a jerk. And then the next case, maybe you're working for the same guy. Now, all of a sudden his head's a little bit bigger, right? And he's like, Mr. Agent. And then he's like, listen, do me a favor. When you go out there tonight, you're going to dinner. Do you really need to have a 4-hour dinner? You and your gangster friends? Me and my gangster friends? Like, what are you talking about? Like, these aren't my friends, but they turn on you in a dime, because they're like, we're sitting out here in a car. Don't be too long, So they start to get a lot of resentment towards you. So now, where do you fall?
Yeah.
I'm against the good guys. Now the bad guys are like, not all of them, but some of the guys are thinking
you're fighting two different sets of people almost.
You really are, and emotionally you're just drained. You go home every day just with the life sucked out of you.
Oh, I can believe it. And I'm sure that put a strain on your personal life, as it's, done a lot of people, as it's depicted in movies with Donnie Brasco and a host of others. And everybody that I've talked to that worked undercover with Jay and Lou, everybody said it put a dramatic strain on their family life.
Sure. Oh yeah, without a doubt. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you're pulled in every direction.
Right. And that's not something that you can just flip off. I mean, especially, even mob world, biker world, whatever the case may be, if you do get a chance to go home and be with your family, it's not like as soon as you walk in the door, you're like, oh, hey, family, nice to see you, love you, come here, say hello to daddy. I mean, you almost have to keep that mindset going 24/7, because if you have it off at the wrong time, it can cause you to get killed.
Sure.
So it's not easy just to go in and just flip that off. It's not like a switch.
Right. You're missing soccer games. You're missing baseball games. Maybe one of your kids have a problem in school, or you get home and you finally have 2 days at home, maybe a day at home, a matter of hours. And your wife is telling you all the problems that you have with the kids. And, one of your kids is having an issue at school, maybe failing. Okay. Well, I don't have time for this right now. I go live again in 8 hours. I need to get some sleep. But to your point, you are worried about your child, and, you're thinking about it as if you do now, right? In your regular life, you lose sleep thinking about your kids' schoolwork and their grades and how you're going to help them out. And then next thing you know, you're up and dressing the part of Giovanni Gatto and hitting the road,
Absolutely. And you don't want to spend those few hours kind of getting on them if you're not able to be around, for an extended period of time. You don't want to spend the little time you do have on them with them, getting on them with that. I worked a little bit of a period of my life where I worked third shift, and working that, man, you don't really get to do anything with your family. And it was like, I hated to kind of get on them the little bit of time when I was around, other than the weekend, because I don't really see them that often. When they were coming in for school, I was still asleep. I woke up just in time to kind of head out the door, and, it was only maybe a 45-minute window where I could see them. So I hated to get on them, if they were doing something wrong, because I'm heading right out the door, and I really didn't get a chance to hang out with them and be a dad until the weekend. So thank God I'm out of that, particular life. But I'd imagine that kind of thing is similar to what you were dealing with, because you're not able to be there very often. And when you are, like you said, it's only a very short window that you have.
It is. Yeah. And, I came up with the psychological part of, I wasn't trained in it, and there comes the Giovanni's ring, that was because of my pinky ring. I always wear a pinky ring. Right. And that's culturally, how we grew up. Mm-hmm. But, in this life, in the DeCavalcante world, I did wear a government ring, government issued. And it was something that I got from the Hoover building. So when I pulled in my driveway at night and I got home to my real family, that was my mental switch. When I took this ring off and I dropped it in that cup holder, I reminded myself I was Giovanni Rocco. I'm not Giovanni Gatto, okay. So I got to leave this turd here in the car. And then, you think I got this, is, but here I was the whole time, lying to myself, basically, because to your point, you get too tired, you get too tired of it. And then, yeah, I'm leaving it and I'll drop it. But a lot of times you don't go through the whole process to, because now you're sitting out in the car and you're going, so you've been home for 20, 30 minutes. What are you sitting in the driveway for? Who are you talking on the phone with? You got a girlfriend, or your kids, or you pull up in your driveway and your phone starts, your burner starts blowing up. Now here you are sitting there talking to a murderer, and there's your kids in the window, banging on the window, waving to you because you're home. And they can't wait to come outside and run outside and greet you, but they can't, because you're like, that's the two worlds colliding, the emotional roller coaster.
Wow. That's, definitely tense situations.
Yeah.
So when do you get word that they're going to pull this whole operation? Obviously it's when they, propose you to go do this hit. They can't obviously let that take place. You can't take part in a murder. How does that kind of go? Do they just pull it immediately? Do they kind of plan an exit, or how does that work?
We planned an exit. Some guys hit the panic button and immediately they were like, well, this is over. Like this, we have to end it. But the seasoned guys step up and they go, you know what, let's just mitigate it. Let's talk it through and see how long we could actually build some evidence. Because again, you just don't want to unplug without the right evidence for this case. Because then you lose, right. You lose the RICO case. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I was able to mitigate it. I was able to control it. I came up with a good story that one of my shooters, was this very dear friend of mine who was going to help me, one of the bikers. And if you want me to do this, I'll do it. But I'm only going to trust guys that I actually have done deeds with in the past.
Right.
I'm not going to use somebody that I don't know. Maybe this guy's going to rat. And they respect that. Mm-hmm. See, those are the conversations that they looked at me differently. They looked at me like, you know what? You think like us. You're smart. Mm-hmm. And that's what Charlie, I think that was his attraction to me, because I would break it down and say, yeah, I could use anybody, but these are the two guys I trust. So, and I said, one guy was on parole and I was waiting for him to finish up parole so he can come down and be a shooter with me, and that didn't rub him well, because a couple of months went by and then the administration got anxious. They wanted it done. And he kept telling him, listen, by this time we were on a wiretap, so we knew the conversations that were taking place. And, he kept saying, listen, this got to get done. Do I need to get on a plane? I'll come and do it myself. No, because if they do that and they think you're not a capable guy, right? And in that world, a capable guy is a guy who can kill. If you're not looked at as a capable guy, well, maybe I'm not going to have you do it. Now, maybe I do away with you and the guy I originally wanted to kill.
Because you knew about it.
Because I knew about it, right?
Yeah.
Or the administration pulled the plug and didn't do the job and said, you know what, we made peace. We're going to let everybody live. We negotiated it, and we're going to, we're all a family. We got to get along. If they decide to do that and they don't want to know the underhandedness, they'll just do away with me because I'm the guy they knew. And I wasn't a made guy. So
yeah, it would have been easy for them to be able to do that. Would you not being, a made guy in the family?
Yeah. And looking back, I was supposed to be made. There was talking to me from my captain, and he explained to me one of my last conversations, and I used to challenge him at the end. We had a father-son relationship, so I was able to challenge him and go, "Hey, listen, I kill this guy. I do these deeds. How does this leave this for me? Everybody in the family is going to know it was me." And he used to come back at me and go, "What are you worried about? They're going to be 50 deep looking to pin a medal on your chest. Don't worry about it." Yeah, but that's you. And then finally, as it went on, he said to me, listen, in November, they're opening up the books. It was a conversation I had in his house, and yeah, they're going to do this, and people are getting raised. And when they make all these other guys, you're going to be one of the guys and you'll get bumped up. So, wow. But again, I didn't make it there. You can't get, it would have been great to be the first undercover to get made in the organized crime, but maybe it's not the time. It's not the place. It's meant to be for another young agent. Hopefully one day, who knows?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people have gotten close, but they really, it's almost the genius, if you will, the long tenure or long time they put you through, your grooming process, your initiation process, especially in the biker world. You have to go through your prospecting phase. In the mob, like you explained, you kind of had to start out with your low hanging fruit and work your way up. There's such a long period of time that you have to prove yourself before you even get to that point of being a made guy in the mob or a full patch member in an MC. That it almost, it's a lot of dollars, to be spent to put those kind of cases in motion and to keep them going for that long. Because largely, for a long period of time, you're going to get nothing in return for your money. Yeah. And then by the time that point gets there, then usually before you get made, you probably are going to have to clip somebody. I'm not saying that's every made guy has killed someone. I'm sure there's people that haven't, but by and large, for the most part, you're going to have to do something extreme to prove your allegiance to the family before they let you in, that type of thing.
I think so. There's guys who have been made, the 80s, way back, they got made because they were great earners. They got made because they were millionaires or whatever. You can buy your button, right? It's been like that for decades. You can be a guy who can buy his button. I know guys in the life that were informants that bought their buttons, plenty of them. So going into it, but there's different organizations, it's the level of the administration that trusts you. If they trust you and they think you're of use to them, then you move up a lot faster.
We're closing in here. One question I like to ask people, when you're doing these types of cases, it's almost impossible, because even though you're aware that, hey, I'm a cop, these guys are bad guys, my job is to go in here and put them away. But to be around that situation every day, around those people every day, you can't help but to come close to some people. Was there ever any one particular person that you kind of, took a liking to, and you kind of maybe felt bad that in the end you were going to be putting them away for probably a long time?
Yeah. I met a lot of people, friendly people, business owners, people that I wish I can go now and still support their restaurants or where I ate at their places, or their companies that they ran, because they were good people. They were really good people, family people, guys inside the crime family. It's not all murder and mayhem. We used to have the best jokes, sitting around all day. Some of these tapes I listened to, they're hysterical. There's the stuff that we would say and the shit you would come up with. Just like guys chewing the fat, knocking it around, chopping it up. And you're not lulled to sleep, because quickly they would always say something or plan something that reminded you of what sometimes sociopaths or greedy people, or, they would turn on their own and eat their own in a minute. Other guys, they were just good street guys and good businessmen. So I was never really lulled to sleep because they always reminded me the family, the true family members that I got close to, and the kids and the nieces and nephews and aunts and uncles, those type of family, the extended family and the good families. That was hard
Yeah.
because you got to remember, I grew up around these guys.
Right.
I grew up around gangsters. I knew gangsters growing up. My father did, they respected my father. So I was welcomed into their houses as kids. So a lot of this for me was a mental screw because it did remind me a lot of when I was a kid. My father let me go home from the mountains one time and I rode with one of his friends and the guy had to make a stop at his brother's house. And I knew his brother was a gangster. And you walked into this, this palace, and you knew where you were. So a lot of those things, my past would come up and would remind me of something from my childhood. So yeah, it was a struggle at times, but they always reminded you, you're on a good guy's side. I never had any temptation to tell anybody.
Right. There was a conversation that I had with Lou about a guy that he had done such a good job at his undercover. He set up a meet at like a hotel. The premise of the meet was he was supposed to meet like a UFC fighter. That was kind of Lou's background story. He was a former fighter, dealt narcotics, things like that. And he didn't go to the hotel. He was at the hotel, but he didn't go into the room that the guy was at. They sent the ATF in there and they basically just laid out, all these pictures and was like, here it is. We've got you on this, this, and this, you can cooperate. And he told him, he's like, look, that guy's not going to cooperate. He's like, you can put him in jail for life, but he's not going to tell you a word. That's just how he is. And they told him, it was like, the guy, this guy right here, he's an undercover ATF agent. He said, that guy said, there's no way. That's bullshit. He's not an undercover ATF agent. And they had to go in there and ask him. It was like, look, he just don't believe that you're an agent. Will you go in there and tell him? And he's like, man, I don't want to do that. And he finally had to go in there and do it. And it was, he done such a good job that guy was, like you said, invite him into your home, have dinner with him, let your kids meet him, bring them over to family functions. You create a bond, even though they might be on one side of the law and you're on the other. There's still that bond that's created. And, I can imagine it would get pretty hard to try to, when it gets down to it, to put some of those guys away. But at the end of the day, you're doing what you got to do. They're doing what they got to do. And to your point earlier, you were talking about your father. Yeah, criminals are criminals, cops are cops. But I think there's always been somewhat of a respect because you're kind of both doing the same job, so to speak. But, one's trying to do the right thing, one's trying to do the wrong thing. But I think there's always been kind of a mutual respect there between the two.
There is. Yeah. And I knew that from my father growing up, right? Like they respected my father. My father was a good cop, never went bad in any way. Always held us to a higher standard. And, even said, if I ever find out, don't ever let me find out, you get this job that you put your hands on somebody who was handcuffed and couldn't defend themselves, I'll beat the ever living hell out of you myself. I don't care if you're a grown man or not,
Right.
So because of that and the way you're raised, you have to swim in the same waters. If you're going to be a jerk off that just breaks these guys' horns all the time, I'm not saying let them get away with crimes, but you got to figure out a way to coexist,
Right.
And it's funny to hear my father, like I worked in restaurants as a kid. And I was around guys, serious guys, made guys that while I'm doing dishes or working in the kitchen, after hours, they're downstairs in the basement eating or having meetings in the hall, So here my father is telling me about these guys. Now I'm around them as a 14-year-old kid, watching these guys beat the hell out of another guy. So I saw that, and then my father telling me a story. Yeah, I pulled this guy over at 2 a.m. First thing I did was pull my gun out and, because what's this guy doing out at 2? He must be disposing of a body in the middle of the night. It's the only reason this cat would be out and about. So I knew those stories going around. For me, I had a case just before this one. I think I told you, with the Italian guy, the maid guy. When I met him and they introduced me as an undercover, the agent made an arrangement in the diner, and the informant, the maid guy in the Italian crime family, and he was a major guy, well respected throughout the country and back to the motherland. We met him in a diner, and the agent says, this is Giovanni. He's with us. He's one of us. And, this is how it's going to go. And, you'll introduce him. And about 2 hours, 3 hours later, I had gone home and I got a call from the case agent. And the case agent goes, listen, you're not going to believe this. This guy's breaking my horns. He thinks I'm lying to him. So what's the matter? He says, he completely went up one side and down the other. He said, he told the agent, what do you think? I'm a jerk off? You bring somebody else. You bring another rat. I'm a rat now. It's bad enough that I'm a rat and I got to do this. But now you bring somebody else and you let them know I'm a rat. And he's like, what are you talking about? That guy Giovanni. who's he with? He says, no, he's an FBI undercover. So I had to get in my car the very next morning to the same diner and bring my creds and show this guy that I was an FBI undercover.
So he thought you were another member that just flipped and was trying to go along with
it. Yeah.
Wow.
So, and then at the end of this case with the decavs, they were, the arresting officers, they think it's funny, but to me, when they tell you these things, it's amusing, but they came back and said, bro, you're never going to believe this. Like, we kicked in the door and while we're cuffing the guy up, he's whispering to his wife, call Giovanni, tell Giovanni to run, make sure you get my phone, call Giovanni and let him know, just tell him to go. So they were still looking out for me, thinking they thought they screwed up and were going to get me in trouble.
Yeah. You were going to go down eventually too.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, things like that, silly stories, but
I mean, it's in a way, it's kind of, you feel bad, but at the same time, that's a credit to your work and how you were able to do what you did, to the fact that when it's going down, their first thought isn't, this is that fucking Giovanni. He calls all this, it's, hey, get a message to him, tell him to run. I don't want him to go down with me.
Yeah. And then later on, they asked me to be there. They wanted me there. And I went out to Vegas when they arrested my captain, because, some of the guys that they were arresting, they were looking at for possibly having some bodies on them. And they thought maybe this was a good time to clear some homicides. And they wanted to have me there, as that guy to come in. So I was ready to do it. It was very uncomfortable. Thank God I didn't have to, because they were gangsters, and they weren't going to talk. So, but I went there just in case they wanted to say, look, this guy, but they already knew, the agents, they pretty much told them who I was. And because you had to ask, what's this about? You're arrested on a RICO charge. There's been an undercover in your family for 3 years, as soon as they'd say, they kind of knew right away.
Yeah. They can kind of piece it together at that point, when they tell them that, and again, that just goes to your credit of how well you were able to pull that off. That was portrayed also in the movie Donnie Brasco, when they went and laid out all the pictures of, the undercover guy, or, it was Johnny Depp, but and they didn't even buy it when they laid out the pictures.
Right.
They was like, nah, they almost had me going,
Right.
And that's just a testament to how well you guys were able to pull off what you were doing. Even when they faced, gave it to them straight, this is, what this guy is, this is who he is, they just still didn't believe it. And, again, a testament to you guys and how you were able to pull that off. When this case was over, how long did you stay in law enforcement after that? Because obviously, you decided to write your book, which is over your shoulder there, Giovanni's Ring, and we're going to get into that. But when this particular case was over, how much longer was your career?
It pretty much ended right away, Wade. I mean, it didn't end with me retiring right away, but it didn't, I would say another year had gone by after the case, and we were prepping for trials, and whoever was going to go to trial, nobody ever did. But for the next 9 months, I sat in my house. Everybody else got arrested. Some guys got the bracelet, or some guys got house arrest while they were out on bail. And then I wound up with the same thing. So I was unplugged operationally right away because of my exposure.
Right.
And then I couldn't leave my house, couldn't go out. So it was pretty much, I was on house arrest too. And then when I did, I had to lay in the backseat of a car. If I had to go into the division, or I had to go have a meeting someplace with the government or the U.S. attorney, I always had to get picked up at a third party location, lay on the backseat of a dirty floor of a car, and, get driven around. So it didn't sit with me. That didn't sit well with me.
So you stayed in New Jersey after all this was over?
I did. Wow. Yeah. For a little while I did. And again, I didn't go anywhere, so I didn't go out with my family. I didn't go in public. But again, I wasn't in public ever since the soccer incident. I never went out in public with my family. I never went to any family thing, never went out to dinner, to the mall, nothing like that.
The ball's on you, my friend. I think I would have had to change states at least.
Yeah, well, that came, and again, being a Jersey guy and having family and connections there, when they did the threat assessment on me, and they said, you can't, you got to go. You can't stay here. This isn't healthy for anybody. So yeah, then the relocation process was tough because you bounce around, and the kids are small and you don't tell them what's going on. It all takes its toll on you. You feel what it's like to be a rat that's going into witness protection. That's what I felt like.
Yeah, no, I mean, and not that it's the same thing, but when this COVID started and everybody was like, stay inside, that'll cause you to go nuts in and in itself, just staying inside. No, obviously that's where I actually started doing this podcast, because it was just driving me nuts. I've always been a guy that needs to go out or do something, or be in the middle of something, or have something going on, some sort of interaction and activity. And I decided to start doing this, and it's led me to, be able to talk to some amazing people, some amazing stories. Some guys that, some guys are cops, some guys are gangsters, some guys are drug smugglers. But at the end of the day, it all comes back to, even when I'm talking to those guys that were on the wrong side of the law, hey, this is it. This is what we did. We went, we served our time, but we're here now to tell people that this is not the way to go. Right. This is not, ultimately, you're going to end up somewhere where you don't want to end up, sacrificing years with your family that you're not going to be able to get back. So it just kind of gives that good point at the end of, yeah, we might have thought this was the right thing to do at the time, but all that's short lived. Would somebody, if somebody told you right now, hey, you could live the high life for, 3 years, but you're going to have to do 15 years in prison. Would you do that? I don't think anybody would do that.
No.
I wouldn't do that.
Right.
And that's what a lot of these guys did. You decided to write that book there, Giovanni's Ring. Was that something that you knew right off the bat that you wanted to kind of get going and tell everybody your experiences? And then also, when you kind of elaborate on that, tell everybody where they can go to pick that up.
Yeah. What happened, Wade, was I didn't intend on writing a book. What happened was I was doing a lot of speaking engagements and trainings for the Bureau. After they unplugged me and, operationally, I became a trainer. I was still training at the undercover schools, and I was still doing speaking engagements and sharing my case studies and my career around the globe for the Bureau and for myself. And every time I did a presentation, everybody would say to me, you got to write a book. You got to write a book. This sounds just like a movie or blah, 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 and it always annoyed me. I'm not narcissistic. Like, I'm not that kind of guy. I don't want to be another guy who wrote a book. But what happened was I kind of springboarded into the mental health side of things. And that's where I'm at now, working with guys on the mental health and behavioral health side. And I saw the need to share my story, because early on in my career, there was a book called Covert. And Bobby Delaney was a New Jersey state trooper who wrote a book, and his infiltration, ironically, into the life in the mob in the neighborhood I grew up in Bayonne, New Jersey. So that was in the 70s. And it was therapeutic for me to read Bob's story, because I realized some of the stuff that he had gone through, I had similarities along the way. So it became like my Bible and just sat on my nightstand. So that was my intention. My intention was to share my story, to try to help somebody else. But everybody liked the gangster stories and the mob stories. But, that's why I'm very raw in the book, to tell my story, because again, like you said earlier, the common denominator is we're all human. When we all make mistakes, just because you put a badge on and you have this authority, you still make mistakes. If you're a gangster, you can still make mistakes. We're all human. So hopefully good guys and bad guys would read it and realize, I made a lot of mistakes in my life early on. I could have been a gangster. I could have been a criminal. I could have been, I might not be here today. I should have been dead or in jail by 25, according to, those who knew me as a young kid. But I'm not. I use everything to pay it forward now. And that was a big reason for the book. But more importantly, I wrote it because it was therapeutic to me. A psychologist suggested write a diary. I started writing. And next thing you know, I met Doug Schofield, who's my co-author. And when I met him, I promised him, I became good friends with him. I said, you know what? I keep hearing write a book. I'll tell you what, I'll make a deal with you. If I ever decide to do it, you'll be the first guy I call. With no intentions on ever calling this guy. But then he kind of pushed me. And I said, look, here's all my 3 and 5 subject notebooks. Here, I'm going to be very vulnerable. You could read it all. Here, read my diaries. And when he read it, he was like, it's all here. And I got 5 books written right here, like, just let's do it. So he was the springboard for me. He's the reason I did it. So, and I'm blessed. I use it as a platform to reach out to others. To your question, it could be found at Barnes and Nobles. It could be found on Amazon. My website, if you want to buy a signed copy, you can go to Giovanni Rocco at giovannisring.com and order it there. It's coming out on audiobook in June, and It's coming back paperback, so it's doing well. Which I'm very grateful for.
Well, good. We'll put the link up to that website in our description, so if guys want to come and buy an autographed copy from you, they can do that. And a lot of times, to speak on what you just said, I know sometimes when they go through like a traumatic experience or traumatic time in their life, they want to block it out and not think about it, not talk about it. But to that, to go against that, sometimes writing it down and, writing out your feelings, pen to paper, sometimes is like a therapy session almost. It is therapeutic. And, that is the way to go. Sometimes you might not think it, but if you actually do it, because a lot of times, we want to talk about these things, but we're very selective of who we want to talk about them to. You know, we might not want to talk about them to our wife. Some people might not be comfortable talking about them to a shrink or something. You know, you want to talk about them to somebody that you have a relationship with, that you know is not going to judge you for it. So as men too, I think is harder. We're very selective on who we want to seem vulnerable to, I think. And you know, it's great that you did that. I think it'll be a fantastic read for a lot of our listeners. I'm gonna get me a signed copy from you as well, and knock that out, because I'm a big fan of anything in this genre. It's all very compelling, and as we said, you know, organized crime and the mob is prevalent, and I think these stories are always in the headlines because it's kind of woven into, you know, our society. When I was coming up, there was a popular rap artist at the time named Ja Rule, and a lot of his music videos would mimic like scenes from Goodfellas and different things like that. Part of his rap group was called Murder Inc., who, as you know, was a real actual faction of New York. You know, they sent out guys to get killed, and a lot of people didn't know that. And I was just like, look, they stole all the stuff from the mob, you know. So it's woven in so deep that you can't help but to kind of, you know, be attached to it and see it and hear about it and want to go study it. And for you to, you know, go in, do what you did, do this undercover work, make it out alive, the most important thing. And then to be able to tell your story, I mean, it's truly a testament to the kind of cop you were, the kind of man you were. And we're glad you could come on the show and share your story with us today. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks. Those words mean a lot. Thank you very much.
Well, absolutely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we will attach, like I said, the address to go pick up Giovanni's book, Giovanni's Ring, The Real Sopranos, in our show notes. You can go pick up a signed copy from there. Again, this interview will be up in its entirety on YouTube, and of course available on all the major audio platforms: Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, even the Stitcher app. No matter what kind of phone you got, Android, Apple, you can get the Stitcher app. That's free for all our podcasts, and you can listen from the first episode all the way to this one right here. Well, that about does it. That was Giovanni Rocco. I am Hollywood Wade, and unfortunately we are out of time. Giovanni, thank you, my friend. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Wade.